I'm Carolyn Ligon, and this is my story. On March 6th of this year, my son Eli was diagnosed with nasopharyngeal carcinoma. A few days later, my dad passed away. In the few days that came after that, it really felt like I was walking around in a fog. I really didn't know what to do. People would call, people would text, people would send emails. They wanted to say they were praying for me. They wanted to say to my husband and I that they would do anything to help us. But honestly, I really don't remember very much that happened in those first few days. We had the funeral for my dad. I even remember sitting at the church and the funeral was happening. But honestly, if you asked me what happened at my dad's funeral, I probably couldn't even tell you the words that were said there. In those first couple of weeks after Eli was diagnosed, we had the scans, and then we went to see the doctors. They had to tell us the staging of his cancer. Eli was in stage 4. And then we had to hear that he was going to have weeks of inpatient chemo that would then be followed by 34 rounds of radiation treatment. I realized at that time that, you sit in church all of your life and you hear that you're going to be faced with peaks and valleys, and I think it was then that my husband and I saw that this was definitely a valley, and it was the largest and biggest valley that we were certainly in at that point. And I thought, wow, how am I going to face this? Where's God in all of this? Certainly He's going to show up. He has to show up. And you knew at that point that your whole world had certainly collapsed, and certainly it was never going to be the same again. So, then we saw God at many points during this entire time, but at that point, we saw small things, I think. Our friends were everywhere. Friends and neighbors came out to support us. They prayed at our house. We got cards from people. So many things were happening all at once. But still, I'll keep saying I don't remember a lot at that time because truly we were scared to death. Then the first couple of treatments started, and Eli was very sick. I was really stressed out, and I remember hanging on to a verse that was Exodus 14:14. It said, "The Lord Himself will fight for you. You need only be still." And we said that to Eli over and over again, and that, telling him God's the one who's going to fight for you, and you don't have to fight for yourself, that God will fight for you. But we knew, too, that God was fighting for us through all of this. And I think when I think back on all of that, that He was fighting for us, and that was how we were getting through all of that at that point. I specifically look back on one incident when we were nearing the end of chemo, and he was in radiation at that time. We were doing both chemo and radiation, and we were really tired and frustrated because we'd been in the hospital in and out, and Eli had been so strong through all of it. He was much stronger than we were. I think on the outside it appeared to everybody that we were doing great. Certainly his parents were doing great, but Eli was awesome. He was always the strongest of everybody. But at that point we were in the hospital, and he was on his feeding tube the whole time at that point, and he couldn't eat food anymore. And he was in the hospital that night, and he was really struggling, and I was just so angry about the whole thing, and I put a post out on social media that was a really frustrated post, and it was just a one line, and I don't remember exactly how I said it now, but it was something about how I hated cancer, and immediately God showed up in that situation, and He showed up so many times, but in this specific situation, He showed up by saying to me through another cancer mom, she said, "Carolyn, I know exactly where you are, but I want you to turn your music on," because everybody around me knew at that point, so many people that knew me and were close to me knew that I listened to Christian music all the time, and that's how I got through a lot of this when I was in the hospital, as I would put my earbuds in and I would listen to music. And she said, Listen to Britt Nichols, The Sun is Rising. She said, because even in your darkest hour, even in Eli's darkest hour, when you're sitting there and it's, pitch black dark and you're in the hospital, I promise you the sun will always rise. And so that very second, I downloaded the song and I listened to it, and I think I probably cried for the bulk of that night. But the morning came, and of course the sun did rise, and I think I must have listened to that song most days after that night in the hospital. And I realized after that day, she's right. God brings the sun. He brings it for me. He brings it for Eli. He brings it for you. Even in our darkest hour, even when you're the most stressed, the sun comes the next day, no matter what you're going through. And things are going to always get better, even when we think that they're not, even when we think that they're at our worst. And people often say to me, Eli today he's cancer-free right now. We're blessed to know that. He's been cancer-free for about a month. But we know in a few weeks we have to face scans again, and he's going to have to face scans for the next 5 years of his life. And often people tell me, Carolyn, how are you going to go through the rest of your life in fear, knowing that he's going to have to face that and he could get cancer again? And also, how do you face that knowing that you still haven't really grieved even the death of your dad, because you've had to live with Eli having cancer even since the moment, your dad passed away? And I always tell them, I don't really have to wake up in fear every day, because at this point I've learned I turn it all over to God. That's what I do, because if I wake up being stressed and worried all the time, I wouldn't be able to survive. And, I shared earlier that the whole time I was in the hospital, the whole time I was in this process, I listened to Christian music, and that was my way of getting through a lot of this. I also read a lot of scripture. And, another favorite song of mine was Christine DeMarco's It Is Well. And, in that song it says, through it all, it is well, and it's truly, it is well with my soul, and I know that I'm going to be taken care of. Eli's going to be taken care of. God is going to take care of our family. And even if it doesn't always go my way, God's going to take care of us, and He's going to take care of my family. So even when you're feeling the most stressed, even in the worst situations, it is well. Thank you for letting me share my story.